This is David Bernstein, founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and this is the SpeechCast. The SpeechCast is a joint endeavor of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and the Speech Project of the Jewish Journal. And today I'm delighted to have with us David Ben Moshe. David just wrote a piece in Newsweek magazine about his experience being incarcerated and what it means for cancel culture. And it really got my attention because it involves two issues I've been working on for much of my career: criminal justice reform, and now cancel culture and wokeness. And he brought them together so eloquently in a single piece. David, we've had a little chance to talk, but it's been really awesome getting to know you. And I'm sure everybody's going to be very interested in hearing your very powerful story as well as your observations. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, David. And great first name you have.
Great first name. Although when you're in a group of Jewish men of a certain age, you're going to find a lot of Davids.
Yeah.
So you're in Israel now. You live in Israel.
I'm currently in Jerusalem, Israel. I'm actually planning on moving from Jerusalem down to Beersheba to be closer to my wife's family. But I am living in Israel. I've been here for the last 4 years and love it here.
So you met your wife at Pardes, which probably a lot of the viewers, listeners are familiar with. Tell us how that happened. It's a great story.
Yeah. So when I was thinking of making aliyah, I talked to my rabbi. My rabbi was like, great, you did birthright, you want to make aliyah, but before you do it, you should go do like a longer, unstructured trip, just to like get a sense of the country, not being led around. So he recommended I come for a few months during the summer. I study at this place called Pardes, which he highly recommended. I came for that trip. I loved Pardes, and then I met my wife while I was here. And then because of her and loving the studying at Pardes, I stayed for the year program. Both were amazing. And before the year was done, I was engaged.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it so happens that your wife's parents.
Yeah, in an interesting twist, it turns out that my wife's parents both studied at Pardes and actually met while studying at Pardes. In fact, all three of us had the same Tanakh teacher, Rabbi Meir Schweiger, who recently retired from Pardes.
Oh, that's beautiful. So you're a Jew by choice. Explain how that happened.
Yeah. So the way it happened is I grew up Christian. And then when I got a little bit older, I fell out of Christianity. I went to college. College wasn't right for me at the time. I dropped out and got into a little bit of trouble, or maybe more like a lot of trouble, and eventually found myself in federal prison. And in federal prison one day, I'm in the library and I'm planning on leaving, but the compound's locked down. And so we're in the library locked down for a few hours, and I'm bored, restless, walking around, and I see a guy who is reading something in a language I can't understand. After a while, I eventually ask him what he's studying. He tells me he's studying, the Bible, and the language is Hebrew. And then I asked another question, and I didn't know at the time, but this question completely changed my life. And that question was, I saw a bunch of boxes at the bottom of the page, and I asked them what they were. It explained to me that they were partially different people explaining different interpretation of what the text means. And this idea that you would have a holy religious book, and it would be important to save so many opinions on what it meant, blew my mind. And I started studying more about Judaism and its history, and eventually decided that this is for me. And when I left prison, I found a synagogue, B'nai Israel Synagogue in Baltimore, Maryland, where I eventually did an Orthodox Jewish conversion.
Beautiful. And you wrote in your Newsweek article that after you left prison, you found it very difficult to go on with your life, other than obviously converting to Judaism, but you found it very difficult to land a job. And you talked about being rejected after being accepted into physical therapy school. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah. So a lot of people have this misconception that in America, kind of you serve your time and you're allowed to re-enter society, which is just completely false. From the day you're released from prison, there's nothing but barriers to you being successful and having a normal life. I have to give an example of how I got my first job leaving prison, which has actually something to do with my Jewish story too. So when you leave prison, if you have to check the box and you have a criminal record, the only job you can get is a fast food job, kind of serving people at McDonald's. And so I was applying to a lot of these jobs because it was the only thing I was qualified for, and I could never get any of them because if you want to start in the fast food industry, they need you to work nights and weekends, and I refused to work on Shabbat, which means I just never could get one of those jobs. And I also applied for the job I really wanted, which is to become a personal trainer, which I was completely unqualified for, had no experience, no degree, and got some interviews, and eventually my criminal record would come up, and that was the end of it. Eventually, one major gym chain had a longer hiring process. They did a group interview and then a personal interview with the manager and then another interview with the manager. And this particular gym chain, no one asked me about my criminal record through the process, and they took a risk and hired me. I found out later what had happened was that everyone thought that someone else during the interview process had asked about it, so they just forgot to ask. And by the time they figured that out, I was such a successful employee that I was okay.
That's
then
great.
Yeah, so I mean, it was just
sometimes incompetence has its benefits, I guess. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and if it wasn't for a few incompetent people, I might still be unemployed. Like I know people who got out of prison who just you cannot get work, and so I've become
unbelievable.
Yeah. A pretty successful personal trainer, and I fall into a specialty. And my specialty was pain management, injury rehab, injury rehabilitation, and I work closely with a lot of physical therapists. And eventually my coworkers and the physical therapists I work with said, hey, you're very talented at this. Like you need to become a physical therapist yourself. Which was very scary for me because I dropped out of college. I was always a poor student, and become a physical therapist in America, you have to do an undergraduate degree and do physical therapy prereqs, which are similar to med school prereqs. And then you have to get into a doctoral program to become a physical therapist. But I decided to do it, and what really motivated me was this. One of the things I was convicted of was distribution of oxycodone. And so I've really seen what Oxycontin did to people and knew how people got addicted. And just so many people, it starts with an injury that the doctor, instead of treating through movement and proper rehab, just gives pain pills for, and people get addicted because they can't handle the pain. And now as a personal trainer working with these physical therapists and in pain reduction, I've seen how a lot of times people can be treated without medication, just with proper movement. And so that was my motivation to buckle down, work hard, become a physical therapist. I get into undergraduate and am a 4.0 straight A student. I ended up leaving the gym I was working at, opened my own personal training studio, and also picked up a side gig doing some consulting work for the Baltimore Police Force SWAT division. Actually, to this day, if you want to join the SWAT team in Baltimore, like I designed your physical fitness testing, and I was involved in a lot of the training programs to help people do that. And so with my 4.0 GPA, and my community service and running a business, I eventually get into 2 of the top 10 physical therapy schools in the nation. I go visit both and I choose one. And the one I choose is the University of Florida. And then after they sent me the acceptance, I visited, I formally accepted them. I started preparing to move. They started asking me some weird questions. And I gave them answers. And eventually they kept asking these weird questions. So I called them up and asked, like, what's going on? They said, well, you told us you have a criminal record in your application, so now you have to apply again. I was like, what? You sent me an acceptance letter. It doesn't mention anything about applying again. And they told me, it's like, well, no, you were accepted into the graduate program at the University of Florida. the way it works is once you're accepted into a graduate program, you're automatically accepted into the university unless you have a criminal record. If you have a criminal record, then you have to apply to the university as well as a second application. If you're not accepted, you can't register for classes, which really made me unhappy because I had turned down another school. They didn't mention this at all in the acceptance letter. And they're like, it's policy. It's not our fault that you didn't know the policy, but there's nothing we can do. You should have known. You would have had to apply again after getting in, even though they didn't tell me. It's not listed anywhere publicly for me to have known. So I talked to some friends who are lawyers, and they basically told me this. They're like, look, they're making you jump through this ridiculous loop, but you are a straight A student. You've had no incidents since return to college. You run a business. You work for the police department. You can get reference letters from community leaders, police officers, judges to your character. Like, I know you're mad, but there's no way you're not getting into the university after they accept you into the grad school. So I sent in my other application. They told me it would be about a week, but they wouldn't commit to any timeline to when they would answer. And I closed my business, ended my lease, prepared to move. They didn't get back to me for a few months, which were some of the most painful months emotionally of my entire life, which is like another story. At the end of that, they ended up deeming me ineligible for admission to the university. So I was in the grad program, but not allowed to register for classes, which meant I couldn't really attend school.
That's outrageous. That's outrageous. So you wrote in this Newsweek piece that you, from your experience in being denied an education after incarceration, it sensitized you to the plight of people who are being canceled and to our discourse. Talk a little bit about that.
So in the last year or so, following like the news and what's happening as far as like social justice type initiatives, which I'm very interested in criminal justice reform and racism in America, I've seen this phenomena of cancel culture grow. And initially, I didn't think it was such a bad thing, but as I see the cases that they choose to really push and how they don't ever let these people get jobs again, they're always constantly being punished. It becomes like this specter that follows them around for the rest of their lives and takes away opportunities. And we really don't have a mechanism for letting them come back to society. Remember, I heard a story covered very well by Barry Weiss on her podcast about a Palestinian man who had a hummus place, Holy Land. And it was like a family business. His daughter worked for him, and his daughter 4 years ago put out some racist, obnoxious, disgusting tweets.
They were, absolutely.
Yeah, and they were completely.
But she was 14 or 15 or 16 when she did it.
And she deleted them, and so there was this outrage. You're like, oh, what your daughter did was inappropriate. You need to fire her. And for something that old, that's probably a big step. But he did end up firing her. But then even after that, they didn't stop. They kept protesting outside of his business. Lots of distributors dropped them. It's like, this guy didn't actually even do anything wrong. Like, you're holding him and his business and everyone else responsible for his 14-year-old daughter's 4-year-old tweets. And just like, and like the minorities he employed who lost their jobs and their livelihoods because his business was being ruined, like it was just completely out of control. And I really like feel for these people because I know what it's like to have made a mistake and to try to do good afterwards and just have the barriers put up and feel like it's impossible to be forgiven. In fact, I'm currently going through a saga where also because of my criminal record, which I was released from prison, which I was released early for over a decade ago. And I'm trying to get citizenship to Israel as a member of the Jewish people. And because of my criminal record, they started off by launching a 9-month investigation into me. And the 9-month investigation came up with that my conversion wasn't valid and they couldn't explain why. I then had to spend 2 years of my life fighting for them to just admit that I was Jewish. And once they finally did, they said, well, now because of the criminal record, we're still not going to give you citizenship. We're just going to put you on a waiting period. And at the end of that, you can get citizenship. And of course, when I asked, like, how long is this waiting period? They're like, the waiting period as long as it needs to be. So, like, I just every day I still live with this just constant punishment that I can't do tshuva and make amends and re-enter society.
Right. By the way, I think if Americans just spent their time on a campaign to get you instated properly as a citizen of Israel, that would be a powerful use of our brain power and advocacy power. Yet I worry that so much of our advocacy power is being put toward this very ideological conversation in America over race and racism that just sucks out our ability to actually do the kind of work in the United States or in Israel that would make lives better for people. What is your take on that?
Yep. I agree 100%. When I see the amount of people and the organizational strength that's going into these cancel campaigns, and a lot of them are going to be small infractions, like, again, the previous example of the 14-year-old girl's tweets. Like, if that energy was being put into helping, former felons get work after they left prison, or doing something about the terrible drug sentencing guidelines, which have just decimated the Black community, we could get some real progress on these issues that would help millions of people who are oppressed and need the help. But instead, we're too busy fighting these ideological battles which aren't actually helping anyone move forward, and just creating a bigger rift in society where it's becoming more of the us versus them, the right versus left, the conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat, where people are staking out their stance, saying this needs to happen, and the other side is tuning them out completely because they're more focused on ideas than fixing reality and trying to make the world into a better, more fair place for all of us, which is what I believe really we need to be putting our energy towards.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about Black-Jewish relations. I mean, you're Black and Jewish, so it exists in you. You're a living example. But you, as you noted in our previous conversation, Black-Jewish relations might have fallen on hard times. What's your sense of what needs to be done?
I think when it comes to, which was once a great relationship, the early civil rights movement was strongly supported by Jews. There's many instances of Jews helping the Blacks in that area of their lives kind of advance. And it was once a great relationship, but is now not so good. I think that, like in any relationship, the onus is on both sides to fix the relationship. One side can't fix it by themselves, and one side can't point a finger to the other side and say, this is all your fault. You need to stop doing X, Y, and Z, and the relationship will be perfect again. Anyone who's ever been in a relationship knows that that's not how you improve a relationship. Always both sides are responsible for the state of the relationship. When it comes to the Black side, I think it is very important that we take the time to look at the facts of situations that involve the Jewish people and educate ourselves about what's happening instead of just repeating talking points that are being pushed by people who aren't a fan of the Jewish people. The best example I see of this is the hatred a lot of the Black community has for Israel, especially more educated Black people in university who have heard these talking points like, oh, Israel is a white colonialist empire that came to the Middle East to oppress a bunch of brown people, and they're now committing a genocide which needs to be stopped, which is just a bunch of lies about Israel. But again, if you haven't taken the time to educate yourself and you hear this from a college professor with a PhD, there's no reason for you to not believe it and think, oh, that the Jews are doing something terrible over there, and really look into what's happening and also realize that there's this narrative that's pushed that a Jew is a white person, which is not true. There are white Jews. There's also lots of Middle Eastern Jews. There's many Black Jews from both North America and from Africa, especially places like Ethiopia and Uganda have giant, huge Jewish communities. And also acknowledging that the Jews have been an oppressed minority historically. And just like it's inappropriate for anyone to have racist ideas against Blacks, anti Semitic ideas also have to be fought just as strongly. Now, from the Jewish side, it's very important for the Jews to recognize that even though we are oppressed people, in America, especially, the Jews have managed to make it very successful as a group, and that the Blacks have a unique problem in America of visual appearance. I remember actually about a year ago, I was going to Europe, and a bunch of Jewish people were like, oh, like, you're going to Europe, remember, it's very anti-Semitic there. Make sure you take off your kippah so you can't be recognized. And like that idea kind of like upsets me, because just the idea that I can hide my identity to avoid discrimination is not an idea that was like even in my mind. And I think a lot of that is that, like, when you're Black in America, everyone knows you're Black. There's no like changing my name, showing up to a job interview, and them not realizing I'm Black when they see my face. And that we can't hide our identities just to move forward in life. And that the long oppressive history of Americans' treatment towards Black people has been very damaging in some ways that the Jews should understand. One of the major ones, I think, that is not completely grasped is what happened to the culture. One of the things that I think makes the Jewish people such a strong people to this day is that we've managed to keep our culture together through all of it. Growing up Black in America, there's not like this sense of this lineage and a culture that goes back thousands of years that we can draw upon for strength as a narrative to keep us together, because when slavery happened, it was so effectively cut off. And the psychological implications of a people going through something like that should not be discounted in how it affects us today. And that's something that the Jews are really in a great place to help the Black people understand how connecting back to our roots and our history can really be a source of strength and help us move further forward. And also not being complicit in fighting certain things that are obviously racially problematic in America. For example, the criminal justice system in America you can just look at the numbers and see, like, as a black man with a felony, it's not like, oh, it's just me, I'm not one out. 1/3 of African American males get a felony conviction in the United States of America. That is atrocious. And the amount of people America gets to figure out how to lock up. One of my favorite stats to give people is the United States of America has more people incarcerated in prison than communist China.
Right.
Not per capita, total people.
Right.
China's got 4 times the population, and we constantly see how oppressive they are. But again, we've got more people locked up than they do. And so many of it is Black people, Hispanic people for nonviolent drug crimes, which we then use as an excuse to ruin their lives, which then ruins the lives of their family, which then causes the cycle of like, oh, like my father went to prison, my uncles went to prison, I'm going to prison is not a big deal. Like I just get to go meet my cousins, which is a dangerous, unhealthy place to be.
Yeah, very powerful. So we have just a few minutes left, and I could go into any of those themes that we brought up in greater depth, but there's a debate raging in American society on critical race theory. And on the one hand, you have whether you call it critical race theory or not is really a semantic debate, but whether you have increasingly schools teaching about racial oppression as a cause of disparity and so forth, and that's happening in a lot of private schools and it's not just looking back. It's as a form of current diagnosis of what disparity in America. And then you have this backlash, and I think it started as a backlash of sort of critique within the left, but it's rapidly become a backlash from the far right in America. People like Tucker Carlson and others attacking it for obliterating the American narrative and what have you. And I'm wondering if you could share some insight on that. Should we accept these ideas wholesale? Should they be ideas that are discussed and debated, or should they be banned, or something else completely?
There are very few things that should ever just flat out be banned. Banning something is a great way to get it a lot of attention and have a lot of people pick up on it because they think you're hiding something that is great from them, and that since you can't fight it logically, you've just got to say it's dangerous and can't be talked about, which pushes a lot of very rational people to look into it and to believe it, which is why banning these ideas, I believe, is a very bad idea.
Good. Agreed.
As far as this idea that critical race theory is the only problem, and that by everything is linked to and fundamentally caused by it, I believe the issue is this. The disenfranchisement of a group of people is a complex problem. Complex problems are always multifactorial in nature. When you focus on one thing as the sole cause and the only thing that needs to be fixed, you miss all of the complex interplay of the other factors that affect it. And you often make solving that problem impossible because you're now so focused on this one thing, you miss the other things that could affect that one thing.
I'm going to have to quote that in my writing. It's so beautifully and succinctly put. I think that is absolutely right. And if there's anything that liberalism should help us do, it's to be able to analyze complex issues with multifactorial explanations in a more full way. And to me, the real disservice of cancel culture is that it will actually hurt the people that it was meant to help, because it won't help us solve complex social problems.
Correct.
So that's really powerful, and I'm so grateful for your insight, and really look forward to working with you. I know you have another call coming up, and I want to respect your time, and look forward.
Thank you for having me. Had a
very
great
close
conversation. Yeah.
Good to talk to you. Be well.
You too. Bye.